My name is Ricky, 61 years old, retired construction foreman who built everything in my life with my own two hands, including my son Jason. After my wife Laura passed, I thought he was all I had left in this world. That is until his housewarming party last month, when he and his wife Amanda called me their glorified servant in front of a room full of their wealthy friends. I just smiled and nodded, but inside something broke. Before I tell you how I taught them respect without losing my dignity yet, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family. I was born and raised in a small Midwestern town where everybody knew your business and hard work was just a way of life. My father worked at the local factory until his back gave out, and my mother cleaned houses for the few well-off families in our community. They taught me early that nobody was going to hand me anything in this life. By 16, I was already working after school at the hardware store, learning about tools and fixing things. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, took a liking to me and taught me everything he knew about construction and repairs. Those skills would become the foundation of my entire career. At 20, I met Laura at the county fair. She was studying to become a teacher, bright and full of dreams. I was rough around the edges, already working full-time in construction, but somehow we just fit together. We married a year later in a simple ceremony at her parents' church. Nothing fancy, just honest love and big dreams. We lived in a tiny apartment while Laura finished school. I was working 2 jobs most weeks, construction during the day and bartending 3 nights a week. My hands were always cracked and calloused, but I never complained. Every dollar went toward building our future. When Laura got her teaching job at the local elementary school, we were able to put a down payment on a small house. Nothing special by most standards, but it was ours. I spent every weekend for months fixing it up, painting walls, replacing the roof, updating the plumbing. Laura would bring me lemonade and sandwiches, joking that she married a human toolbox. Those were simple days, but they were good. We had enough to get by and a little left over for the occasional dinner out. Laura always said we were rich in ways that mattered most. I believed her. Construction work was dangerous, especially the high-rise projects I worked on as I moved up to foreman. 2 of my co-workers had serious injuries over the years, and I had my share of close calls. But the pay was good, and every promotion meant more security for our family, especially once we started trying for a baby. That part didn't come easy. 5 years of trying 2 miscarriages and more heartbreak than I care to remember. The doctors used words like complications and low probability. Laura would cry at night when she thought I was asleep. I would pretend not to notice, trying to be strong for her. We nearly gave up hope. Then came Jason, our miracle. Born healthy and perfect in every way. The moment I held him, I knew I would do anything for this child. Work harder. Build higher. Whatever it took to give him a life better than my own. From the day Jason was born, everything I did was for him. Every overtime shift. Every dangerous job. Every missed baseball game because I was working a second job to put money away for his college fund. I told myself it was worth it, that he would understand someday. Jason was a bright kid from the start. By 3rd grade, his teachers were telling us he was gifted, especially in math and science. Laura would help him with homework at the kitchen table while I worked on household repairs. Sometimes he would watch me fix things, asking questions about how things worked. Those were my favorite moments. When Jason was 12, he won the state science fair with a project on structural engineering. I took 2 days off work to drive him to the competition 4 hours away. Watching him accept that trophy, I felt a pride I can hardly describe. This boy was going places his old man never could. High school came and Jason started talking about college. Not just any college, but top schools with names that intimidated me. Schools I could never have dreamed of attending. His guidance counselor told us he had the grades for a scholarship, but they rarely covered everything. I started picking up weekend work with a buddy's roofing company. Laura took on tutoring after school. We never told Jason how we were stretching ourselves financially. When he got accepted to a prestigious university with only a partial scholarship, we celebrated like we had no worries in the world. That night, after he went to bed, Laura and I sat at the kitchen table calculating how to make it work. I would need to postpone retirement by at least 5 years. We would need to refinance the house, but we would make it happen. Then came the news that changed everything. During a routine checkup, doctors found something concerning in Laura's breast. Early-stage cancer, they said. Treatable, but it would require surgery, radiation, and time off work. The medical bills started piling up alongside the college tuition statements. I remember sitting in the hospital during Laura's treatments, looking at the college bills and feeling like I was drowning. But I never let Jason see that. When he called from school excited about his classes or new friends, I kept my voice upbeat. This was his time to grow, not to worry about his parents' struggles. I took on more responsibility at work, managing bigger crews and more complex projects. The stress was immense, but the overtime pay helped keep us afloat. Some nights I would get only 4 hours of sleep before heading back to the site. But I kept going because that's what a father does. Laura recovered, thank God, though the experience aged us both. The medical debt took years to pay off, but Jason's education remained our priority. He graduated near the top of his class and announced he was applying to law schools. More tuition, more loans, more years of pushing back my retirement. But seeing the man my son was becoming, I believed it was all worthwhile. It was during law school that Jason met Amanda. She came from a wealthy East Coast family, the kind of people who had vacation homes and country club memberships. From the first time Jason brought her home, I could see the difference in our worlds. Amanda was polite enough, complimenting Laura's cooking and asking about my work. But there was something in her tone, a subtle note of condescension, when I talked about construction projects, or when I used phrases common among the men I worked with. She would exchange glances with Jason, little looks I wasn't supposed to notice. After they left that first visit, Laura said, "She thinks she's marrying up from you, not down." I told her she was being too sensitive, but deep down I wondered if she was right. As Jason progressed through law school, his visits home became less frequent. His speech patterns changed, adopting the precise, measured tones of his professors and future colleagues. He stopped asking me to teach him how to fix things around the house. When I offered advice about anything, he would smile politely, but rarely take it. I tried hard to bond with Amanda over the years, bringing thoughtful gifts when we visited, offering to help with projects around their first apartment. She would thank me, but often rearrange whatever I had organized or redo tasks I had completed, as if my work wasn't quite up to her standards. Laura saw it all and worried about the growing distance, but she always encouraged me to keep trying. "Your son is finding his way in a different world," she would say. "Just keep showing up with love." Then 3 years ago, Laura's cancer returned, more aggressive this time. Within 6 months, she was gone. At the funeral, Jason stood by my side, strong and composed in his expensive suit. He handled the arrangements with efficiency, taking control in ways that both relieved and slightly diminished me. After the service, he and Amanda returned to their lives, while I went home to an empty house filled with 40 years of memories. The silence was deafening. For months, I moved through my days on autopilot. Retirement came earlier than I had planned due to worsening arthritis in my knees from decades of construction work. Jason called occasionally, always sounding rushed. His visits became rare events that required planning weeks in advance. I tried to fill my time with small projects and old friends, but the loss of Laura left a hole nothing seemed to fill. What hurt most was realizing that my relationship with my only son had somehow slipped away when I wasn't looking. After law school, Jason and Amanda both landed positions at prestigious corporate law firms in the city. Their combined income was more than I could imagine, and their social circle changed accordingly. Within 2 years, they were talking about neighborhoods I had only seen in magazines, discussing restaurants where dinner cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Their calls became even less frequent. When we did speak, Jason would talk about cases he was working on using legal terminology I couldn't follow, or about colleagues and partners whose names blended together in my mind. Amanda would sometimes take the phone briefly, asking how I was doing, in that bright, quick way that didn't really invite a genuine answer. Still, I tried to stay connected. I sent thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts, usually something I had made by hand. Jason had always admired my woodworking, and I hoped these personal items would remind him of home. When they bought their first condo, I offered to help with moving or setting things up. Jason thanked me but said they had hired professionals for everything. I kept my disappointment to myself. Laura would have understood, but she wasn't there anymore to listen to my concerns about our son drifting away. Then came the invitation to their housewarming party. They had purchased their first actual house, a large home in an exclusive neighborhood. The invitation arrived by email, formal and impersonal, but I was genuinely excited at the chance to reconnect with Jason and see this new chapter in his life. I spent days thinking about the perfect gift. Finally, I decided on a high-end tool set, the kind I always wished I had when I was younger. Practical, valuable, and symbolic of my hope that Jason might still want to learn from his old man about taking care of a home. I spent more than I should have, nearly a full month of my retirement check, but I wanted him to be proud to show it off. The week before the party, I had my hair cut at the barbershop downtown rather than trimming it myself as usual. I pulled out my one good suit, the one I had worn to Laura's funeral, and had it professionally cleaned. I even bought a new tie, practicing the knot, until it looked perfect. The day of the party, I drove an hour to reach their neighborhood, navigating streets lined with houses that looked like they belonged in magazines. Their home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a large colonial with perfect landscaping and a 3-car garage. My 15-year-old pickup truck looked distinctly out of place, parked among the luxury vehicles lining the street. Standing on their porch, gift in hand, I took a deep breath and rang the bell. Jason answered, drink in hand, looking surprised to see me so early, though I had arrived exactly at the time specified on the invitation. "Dad," he said, glancing at his watch. "You made it." "Come in, we're still setting up." Inside the house was even more impressive. Soaring ceilings, marble floors in the entryway, furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. Amanda was directing a young woman in uniform where to place trays of appetizers that looked too artistic to eat. Jason took my gift with a quick thanks and set it aside without opening it. He introduced me to a few early arrivals with minimal explanation, just his father, before being pulled away by Amanda to discuss something about the caterers. I stood awkwardly in the living room, admiring the craftsmanship of their built-in bookshelves while trying to look comfortable. Soon the house filled with guests, most of whom seemed to know each other. They formed natural conversation groups, laughing about shared experiences at work or vacation spots I had never visited. I noticed Jason moving easily among these people, his language and mannerisms matching theirs perfectly. He seemed to have memorized details about each person's life, asking specific questions about their children or recent trips. With me, conversations had become stilted and generic, but here he was, animated and engaged. Amanda's parents arrived, making a grand entrance. Unlike me, they were immediately surrounded by guests. Her father, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, shook hands confidently, while her mother air-kissed her way through the crowd. When Jason finally brought them over to meet me, the contrast between us was painfully obvious. "So you're Jason's father," Amanda's father said, looking me over. "Construction, right? Honest work. We need more men willing to work with their hands in this country. The comment seemed complimentary on the surface, but his tone made me feel like a curiosity, a relic from another time. I nodded politely, mentioned being retired now, and the conversation quickly moved on to topics I couldn't contribute to property values in their neighborhood and some exclusive resort they had all visited. As the evening continued, I felt increasingly out of place. When I noticed empty glasses and used plates accumulating, I instinctively began gathering them. In our home, I had always been the one to clean up while Laura entertained. It gave me something useful to do during social gatherings, where conversation didn't come easily. In the kitchen, I rinsed plates and arranged them neatly beside the sink, nodding to the catering staff who seemed surprised by my help. Amanda entered looking slightly flustered. "Oh, Ricky, you don't need to do that," she said. "That's what we're paying the staff for. Please go enjoy the party." I dried my hands and returned to the living room, where I noticed a few guests watching me with curious expressions. One woman leaned toward her husband, whispering something that made him glance in my direction. I pretended not to notice, finding a quiet corner where I could observe without being too conspicuous. As the evening wore on, I made a few attempts at conversation with other guests. Most were polite but brief, quickly finding reasons to move on to more interesting company. One man asked what neighborhood I lived in, then barely concealed his surprise when I named my modest suburb. Another asked if I'd like to join their golf group, then lost interest when I admitted I had never played. I heard Amanda's mother telling someone about her cleaning lady, describing her as hard-working, but unable to properly polish the silver. "They should stick to what they know," she said with a laugh. The guest nodded in agreement, adding something about the importance of knowing one's place. I felt a heaviness growing in my chest. This was Jason's world now, and there seemed to be no place in it for someone like me. After about 2 hours, I decided to make myself useful again by clearing more dishes. The catering staff seemed busy with food preparation, so I quietly moved through the living room, gathering empty glasses and small plates with discarded napkins. I had just returned from the kitchen and was reaching for an empty wine glass when I heard a woman's voice behind me. "Excuse me," she said, her tone slightly imperious. "Are you with the catering company?" Before I could answer, I heard Jason laugh. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, but one that suddenly made my stomach twist. "No, that's just my dad," he said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. "He's always been a glorified servant. Can't help himself." Amanda joined in with a laugh of her own. "It's how he feels useful, bless his heart," she added, using that southern phrase people use when they want to say something unkind while sounding sweet. The room went silent for a moment, then erupted in awkward laughter. I stood frozen, wineglass in hand, my face burning with humiliation. All these people strangers to me, laughing at a son, dismissing his father as nothing more than household help. In that moment, I saw myself through their eyes, an aging working-class man trying to fit into a world where he didn't belong. I felt every callus on my hands, every ache in my knees from decades of physical labor. Labor that had paid for the education that allowed my son to stand there and mock me. But something my father taught me long ago came back to me. Never let them see you bleed. So I forced my face into a smile, nodded, as if acknowledging a simple truth, and continued gathering dishes. I even managed to chuckle, though the sound felt hollow in my throat. Jason and Amanda had already turned away, moving on to more interesting conversations, not noticing, or perhaps not caring about the pain their words had caused. The party continued around me as if nothing significant had happened, while I felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door behind me and leaning heavily against the sink. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger, an old man with hurt eyes and a forced smile. For the first time in years, I felt tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in their house. As I stood there, memories washed over me in waves. Jason at 5 riding on my shoulders as we walked through the park. At 12, proudly showing me his science fair trophy. At 18, hugging me before leaving for college, thanking me for making it all possible. Then came darker memories. The 60-hour work weeks that kept me from his baseball games. The dangerous jobs I took for better pay. The college tuition bills I paid while putting off fixing our leaking roof. The pride I felt watching him graduate, become a lawyer, marry a beautiful woman, all of it now tarnished by the realization that my son saw me as nothing more than a servant. I thought about leaving right then, slipping out the back door, and driving home without another word. But something in me, perhaps Laura's voice in my head, told me to hold my ground. To leave would be to confirm their view of me as someone who didn't belong, who could be dismissed with a cruel joke. So I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my tie, and returned to the party with my dignity intact. I would see this evening through showing more class than they had shown me. Back in the living room, I noticed an older gentleman watching me with a thoughtful expression. He approached as I stood awkwardly by the fireplace, examining the expensive art pieces displayed there. "Beautiful Remington sculpture," he said, nodding toward the bronze figurine I had been admiring. "I'm Frank Thompson, by the way. Thoracic surgeon at Memorial." "Ricky Harris," I replied, shaking his offered hand. "Construction retired." His handshake was firm, his manner direct but friendly. Unlike most guests, he seemed genuinely interested when he asked what type of construction I had specialized in. "Commercial high-rises mostly," I explained. "Worked my way up from general laborer to foreman. 38 years with the same company." "Impressive," Frank nodded. "That's craftsmanship that stands the test of time. My father was a carpenter. Built half the houses in our neighborhood growing up." Something in his tone told me he had witnessed the earlier incident. There was a kindness in his eyes, but also something else, a sort of knowing recognition. As we talked, Frank revealed he was a widower himself with a daughter about Jason's age. "I heard the way your son spoke to you earlier," he said quietly when we had moved to a quieter corner. "My daughter went through a phase like that. Suddenly, her mother and I weren't sophisticated enough for her new life." The acknowledgement of what had happened, spoken without pity but with understanding, nearly broke my composure. "How did you handle it?" I asked. Frank smiled, a mixture of sadness and satisfaction in his expression. "I let natural consequences teach what I couldn't. Sometimes life presents perfect teaching moments. We just have to be willing to let them unfold." We continued talking, finding unexpected common ground, despite our different professions. By the end of our conversation, we had exchanged phone numbers, Frank insisting we should meet for coffee sometime. As the party began to wind down, I managed to have a brief surface-level conversation with Jason and Amanda, complimenting their home and thanking them for the invitation. If they felt any remorse for their earlier comments, they showed no sign of it. Jason seemed distracted, checking his watch repeatedly, while Amanda was already discussing cleanup with the catering manager. I left shortly after slipping out, with minimal goodbyes. As I drove home in the darkness, the full weight of the evening settled over me like a heavy blanket. The drive home from Jason's house should have taken an hour, but I found myself taking a detour. Without really planning to, I pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Park, where I used to take Jason fishing on Sunday afternoons when he was a boy. At nearly midnight, the park was deserted, just the distant hum of traffic and the gentle lapping of river water against the bank. I sat in my truck, hands still gripping the steering wheel, and finally let the tears come. They weren't dramatic sobs, just a steady, quiet flow, the kind of crying men my age do when nobody's watching. Tears for Laura gone too soon to see what our son had become. Tears for the relationship I thought we had built. Tears for the decades of sacrifice that had apparently earned me nothing but derision. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos, Jason's graduation, his wedding day family Christmas gatherings, when Laura was still with us. In every picture, I saw the same thing, a father looking at his son, with unconcealed pride, and increasingly over time a son, looking past his father, toward something else, something more. The phone rang suddenly, startling me. Jason's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, but habit and hope won out. "Dad," his voice sounded normal, casual, as if nothing had happened. "Just wanted to make sure you got home okay. You left without saying goodbye." I cleared my throat, wiping away tears he couldn't see. Still on my way, I said, omitting any mention of where I actually was. "Thanks for checking." "Great party, right?" he continued, oblivious to my state. "Amanda really knows how to put these things together. Everyone loved the house." I murmured agreement, wondering if he even remembered what he had said about me, if it had registered at all, or was just a throwaway comment in an evening full of conversation. "Well, drive safe," he finished. "Talk soon." The call ended, and I sat in the growing cold, staring at the dark water of the river. Something had broken inside me, but something else was forming in its place, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I started the truck and finally headed home. The next days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and quiet reflection. I went through the motions of my regular routine: morning coffee, newspaper, small household repairs. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment at the party on an endless loop. After the third night of minimal sleep, I found myself in the attic, pulling out boxes of Laura's things that I hadn't been able to sort through after her death. Among them was a collection of journals she had kept over the years. I had always respected her privacy too much to read them while she was alive, but now I found myself seeking her wisdom, her perspective. In a journal from Jason's high school years, I found an entry that stopped me cold. "I worry about Jason. Ricky gives him everything, works himself to exhaustion, to provide opportunities, but I see a hardness developing in our boy, an entitlement. As if all this sacrifice is merely his due. I try to correct this, to teach gratitude, but it's difficult when Ricky won't allow Jason to experience any hardship or disappointment." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Had I contributed to this? Had my determination to give him everything actually robbed him of something essential? Character, gratitude, respect for honest work. I called Frank, the doctor I had met at the party, and asked if his coffee invitation was still open. We met at a small cafe downtown later that day. Without much prompting, I found myself telling him everything: the decades of sacrifice, Laura's death, the growing distance, and finally, the humiliation at the party. Frank listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he sat back and considered me carefully. "You know, Ricky," he said, "there comes a point where continuing to give without requiring respect becomes harmful to both parties." His words echoed Laura's journal entry with eerie precision. "So what do?" I asked. "He's my only son." Frank sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You establish boundaries, not out of anger or vengeance, but out of love for yourself and for him. The question is, will you recognize the opportunity when it presents itself?" I wasn't sure what he meant, but I felt something shifting inside me, a new perspective taking shape. That night, I reread more of Laura's journals, finding other entries that expressed concern about our parenting, about the man Jason was becoming. It was painful to realize she had seen warning signs I had missed, too blinded by love and the desire to give him everything I never had. The next few days, I continued my routine while processing everything I had learned. I had just started making dinner on Friday evening when my phone rang. It was Jason, his voice tight with stress. "Dad, we have a serious situation here," he said without preamble. "The main water line to the house broke, and there's water everywhere. The finished basement is flooded, and it's threatening the hardwood floors in the entryway." "Have you called a plumber?" I asked, already knowing what was coming. "Everybody in the area is booked solid," he explained. "There's been flooding from the heavy rains and emergency services are stretched thin. The earliest anyone can come is Monday, but we can't wait that long. The water damage will be catastrophic." He paused, then added, "Amanda's parents are on a cruise, so they can't help either." I closed my eyes, hearing the desperation in his voice. This was exactly the kind of situation Frank had hinted at, a natural consequence, a teaching moment. I felt a momentary satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt for feeling that way. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about something more important. "I need your help, Dad." Jason finally said the words, sounding foreign in his mouth. "I know you know how to fix these things." I took a deep breath, thinking carefully about my response. The old me would have dropped everything and rushed over, eager to be needed to prove my worth. But that approach had led us here to a place where my son felt comfortable publicly dismissing decades of sacrifice. "He'll help you," I said finally, my voice calm and measured. "But we need to be clear about something first." "What do you mean?" he asked, confusion evident in his tone. "Dad, this is an emergency." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And I'm happy to help, but not as your servant." The line went silent for a moment. What he finally managed. "At your party," I said evenly, "you and Amanda called me your glorified servant in front of all your guests. You laughed about it. They laughed too." "Dad, that was just—" Jason began, his voice defensive. It wasn't just anything, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. It was deeply disrespectful, and it hurt me very much. Another long silence followed. "Dad, I'm sorry if that came across badly, but right now our house is literally flooding and I need your help." "And he'll give it," I assured him. "But first, I need you to understand something. I'm your father, not your employee. I deserve basic respect, especially in public. So if you want my help, you'll need to acknowledge what happened and offer a real apology. Not because of the emergency, but because it's the right thing to do." I could almost hear his internal struggle through the phone, a mixture of urgent need and wounded pride. Finally, he sighed. "You're right," he admitted, his voice quieter. "What I said was disrespectful and hurtful. I'm sorry, Dad. Truly. Now please, can you come help us? I'll be there in an hour," I told him, already reaching for my tools. When I arrived at Jason's house, the scene was one of chaos. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing Jason in soaked shoes and rolled-up pant legs. Behind him, I could see puddles of water spreading across their expensive marble floors. "Dad, thank God," he said, genuine relief washing over his face. "It's gotten worse. The shut-off valve isn't working properly." I followed him inside, surveying the damage. Water was seeping from the basement up through the floor joints, threatening thousands of dollars in hardwood flooring. Amanda was frantically moving furniture and placing towels to absorb the water, her designer outfit soaked, mascara smeared from tears of frustration. The sight gave me no pleasure. Regardless of how they had treated me, this was a homeowner's nightmare, and I understood their panic. Still, I moved deliberately, setting down my toolbox and taking a moment to assess the situation properly. "First, we need to find the main water supply to the house," I said calmly. "It's usually outside, often near the street." "We tried that," Amanda said, her voice strained. "The handle is stuck, and Jason couldn't turn it." I nodded, pulling a specialized wrench from my toolbox. Years of working with stubborn valves had taught me to come prepared. Before heading outside, though, I paused, looking at them both. "While I'm fixing this, I think we need to talk about more than just pipes," I said. The directness of my statement caught them off guard. They exchanged a glance, then Jason nodded reluctantly. "Dad, I already apologized on the phone," he began. "To me, yes," I acknowledged. But Amanda was also part of what happened. Amanda looked confused, then defensive, as Jason quietly explained what the call had been about. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "That comment at the party," I continued, "about me being a servant. Do you know what that felt like? To hear my son, who I put through college by working 60-hour weeks, call me that in front of strangers." Neither of them spoke, water continuing to pool around our feet. "I want you to know something," I said, my voice steady. "Every callus on these hands, every ache in these knees, every missed vacation and second job, they were all for you, Jason. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to give you opportunities I never had. But that doesn't make me your servant. It makes me your father." The weight of my words hung in the air, competing with the urgent situation around us. Finally, Amanda stepped forward, her expression softening. "You're right, Ricky," she said, using my name perhaps for the first time without a note of condescension. "What we said was inexcusable. I am truly sorry." Jason moved beside her, adding, "We both are Dad." I don't know why I said that. It's not how I really feel about you. I looked at them closely, searching for sincerity. What I saw satisfied me for now. "There's water damage to address," I said. "Let's take care of that first. The rest we'll discuss once the crisis is averted." Outside, I located the main water supply and used my specialty wrench to shut it off, applying techniques learned over decades of similar challenges. Back inside, I assessed the source of the break, a failed connection in the main line where it entered the basement. "I could fix this," I explained, "but I'd need some supplies from the hardware store." I listed what we would need, expecting Jason to volunteer to go get them. Instead, he surprised me. "Can I come with you?" he asked. "Maybe you could show me what to look for." His request caught me off guard, a small but significant shift. For the first time in years, he was asking to learn from me rather than dismissing my knowledge. At the hardware store, I guided Jason through selecting the right parts, explaining what each was for and why quality mattered. He listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. The clerk, recognizing a fellow tradesman in me, offered professional discounts and additional advice that Jason seemed to note with newfound respect. Back at the house, I demonstrated how to repair the broken connection, explaining each step carefully. Jason handed me tools and asked thoughtful questions while Amanda worked alongside us, handling the cleanup with an energy I hadn't seen her direct toward manual tasks before. As we worked through the evening and into the night, our conversation gradually shifted from the immediate problem to deeper topics. During a break while waiting for some adhesive to set, Jason asked about my early days in construction, showing curiosity about a part of my life he had previously seemed eager to distance himself from. "You know, I never really understood how dangerous your work was until I handled that lawsuit for the construction company last year," he admitted. "Some of the accident reports made me think about what you did every day while I was growing up." I shared stories I'd never told him about close calls on job sites, about responsibilities of managing crews on dangerous projects, about solving complex structural problems with limited resources. He listened with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time the skill and intelligence required for work he had dismissed as merely physical labor. Amanda joined the conversation, initially quiet, but gradually asking her own questions. When she brought us coffee around midnight, she mentioned something that surprised me. I found some articles about you online last week, she said. About that project downtown, the Wilson Tower. There was a piece about how you spotted a potential structural failure that saved lives and millions in damages. I hadn't realized she'd looked me up or that those old news stories were still accessible online. The Wilson Tower incident had been one of my proudest professional moments, but I had never mentioned it to Jason or Amanda, assuming they wouldn't be interested. That was a tough situation, I acknowledged. The architect's design looked good on paper, but I noticed a flaw in how it accounted for wind shear. They didn't want to hear it from a foreman, but I insisted. Eventually, they ran additional calculations and found I was right. Jason looked at me differently, then a mixture of surprise and something else, regret perhaps, for how much of me he had chosen not to see. We worked until dawn, finally completing the repairs and starting the long cleanup process. By morning, the immediate crisis was averted, though some water damage would require professional restoration. We sat at their kitchen table exhausted, but satisfied with our night's work. "Why didn't you ever talk about your work like this before?" Jason asked suddenly. I considered the question carefully. "You never seemed interested," I replied honestly. "After a certain point, it felt like my world embarrassed you." He winced at the truth in my words. "I think maybe I was the one who should have been embarrassed," he said quietly. "Not of you, but of myself." Amanda reached across the table and took my hand, an unprecedented gesture from her. "Your knowledge just saved us thousands of dollars and prevented a disaster," she said. "I think we both have a lot to learn from you, Ricky." In that moment, exhausted and surrounded by the aftermath of flooding, something new began to take shape between us, a foundation for a different kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than obligation and tolerance. As we finished our coffee, Jason mentioned something unexpected. "Actually, Dad, I was going to call you anyway. Frank Thompson, the doctor you met at our party. He invited us to dinner at his home next weekend. He specifically asked if you would come too." Frank had called me earlier that week, but had said nothing about including Jason and Amanda in his invitation. I wondered if this had been his plan all along, creating an opportunity for us to see each other in a different context. "I'd like that," I said simply. Frank Thompson's dinner party was nothing like Jason's. Held in a comfortable but not ostentatious home filled with books and art collected over a lifetime of travel, it brought together an eclectic group of guests. There were several doctors from Frank's hospital, a retired judge and his wife, a university professor, and somewhat to my surprise, an electrician who had worked on Frank's home renovations and apparently become a friend. What struck me immediately was how Frank introduced each person by their accomplishments and character rather than their titles. When he introduced me, he mentioned my work on several landmark buildings in the city and my reputation for integrity among contractors throughout the region. Information he must have researched after our meeting. Jason and Amanda arrived slightly after me, looking somewhat uncertain in this unfamiliar social setting. Frank greeted them warmly, but without the deference they might have expected from their usual circles. Here, their prestigious law firm affiliations were noted, but not dwelt upon. Instead, conversation centered on ideas, current events, and personal experiences rather than status markers. During dinner, I found myself engaged in a lively discussion about urban development with the judge and the professor, my practical knowledge of construction complementing their theoretical expertise. To my surprise, several guests asked thoughtful questions about my perspective, valuing insights formed through decades of hands-on experience. I noticed Jason watching these exchanges with a thoughtful expression. At one point, the conversation turned to a controversial new high-rise project downtown, and someone asked for my opinion. "Well, the design is ambitious," I offered, "but having looked at the publicly available plans, I'm concerned about how they're handling the foundation, given the soil composition in that area." The professor leaned forward, intrigued. Can you elaborate on that? We just had a faculty debate about this very issue, as I explained the technical aspects using a napkin to sketch the problem. I saw Jason watching with new eyes, perhaps realizing for the first time that his father's knowledge, while different from his own, was equally valuable in the right context. Later, as smaller conversation groups formed after dinner, I overheard Amanda talking with Frank's daughter Sarah, a pediatric surgeon. They were discussing Sarah's volunteer work with a medical mission in Central America. It's incredible what you do, Amanda said, genuine admiration in her voice. My work feels so insignificant in comparison. Sarah smiled thoughtfully. Every profession has ways to make a meaningful contribution, she replied. My father always says what matters is how you treat people, not what you do for a living. I caught Frank's eye across the room, and he gave me a subtle nod. This evening was no accident, I realized. It was a carefully constructed opportunity for Jason and Amanda to see a different kind of social circle, one where accomplishment was measured by contribution and character rather than wealth or status. As the evening progressed, I was introduced to Frank's other friends, many of whom had known each other for decades. Their easy camaraderie spoke of relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than networking or advantage. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't at a social gathering since Laura was alive. When it was time to leave, Frank walked us all to the door. As Jason and Amanda thanked him for the invitation, Frank casually mentioned, "We do this every other Sunday. Nothing formal, just good food and conversation. You'd all be welcome any time." On the drive home, I received a text from Jason. Can we start having regular family dinners, maybe Sunday evenings, when we're not at Frank's, just the three of us? It was a small gesture, but it represented something significant. A desire to rebuild what had been broken to create new traditions rather than continue drifting apart. I texted back a simple yes, feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time in years. That first dinner at my modest home was somewhat awkward. Jason and Amanda seemed unsure of themselves outside their usual environment, and conversation occasionally stalled. But they had made the effort to come, bringing a bottle of wine and asking questions about the family photos displayed on my walls. We agreed to make it a regular event, each of us taking turns hosting. Over the following weeks, these dinners became more natural. Sometimes we discussed current events or our weekly activities. Other times, Jason would ask about family history or stories from his childhood that he had forgotten or never heard. Amanda began asking me to teach her basic home maintenance skills, admitting that despite growing up with wealth, she had never learned practical self-sufficiency. When they hosted at their home, I noticed subtle changes. The intimidating formality was softened by personal touches, flowers from their garden, rather than expensive arrangements, homemade desserts instead of catered confections. They stopped apologizing for things not being perfect, instead embracing the authentic imperfections that make a house feel like a home. 6 months after the party incident, the change in our relationship was remarkable. What began as a crisis and confrontation had evolved into something I hadn't dared hope for, a genuine connection based on mutual respect and appreciation. Jason and Amanda now came for dinner every Sunday, a tradition we maintained with surprising consistency despite their busy professional lives. These weren't obligatory visits marked by glances at watches and early departures, but relaxed gatherings that often stretched late into the evening. I noticed Jason speaking differently around me, no longer code-switching between his professional persona and some simplified version of himself he thought I could understand. Instead, he spoke normally, but took time to explain legal concepts when they came up, treating me as someone capable of understanding his world rather than someone to be kept separate from it. The most surprising development was Amanda's transformation. The woman who once looked at my calloused hands with barely disguised distaste now asked me to teach her how to use power tools. We started with basic home repairs, but her interest grew to include more complex projects. "My parents think I've lost my mind," she admitted one afternoon, as we installed shelving in their home office. "Mom asked if we couldn't just hire someone, and I told her there's satisfaction in creating something with your own hands." Her words echoed something Laura used to say, and the similarity caught in my throat. I simply nodded, continuing to demonstrate the proper technique for securing the brackets. Jason, too, began reconnecting with aspects of himself he had seemingly buried in his pursuit of professional success. He dug out his old baseball glove, suggesting we play catch in the backyard like we used to when he was young. During these simple activities, he began sharing more about the pressures of his work, the ethical dilemmas he faced, the parts of corporate law that left him feeling empty despite the financial rewards. "Sometimes I wonder if I chose the right path," he confessed one evening, as we sat on my back porch. "The money's good, but most days I'm just helping wealthy corporations become wealthier. It's never too late to make adjustments." I told him, thinking of Frank's daughter, who balanced her surgical career with meaningful volunteer work. Success can be measured in many ways. Jason nodded thoughtfully, seeming to truly hear me for the first time in years. "Dad, I want to apologize again for what happened at the party," he said after a long pause. "Not just the comment, but for everything it represented, how I've treated you, how I've taken you for granted." "I appreciate that," I said simply. We had discussed the incident several times in the months since each conversation, digging deeper into the patterns that had developed between us. "You know, your mother worried about this," I added, telling him about Laura's journal entries for the first time. The revelation visibly affected him. "She saw it happening, and I was too self-absorbed to notice," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I wish she could see us now trying to fix things." "She can," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. Laura had always believed in the possibility of growth and redemption. Over these months, my own life expanded beyond my relationship with Jason. Frank and I became regular golfing partners, despite my initial lack of skill, and through him I met other men my age with similar experiences, fathers navigating relationships with adult children, widowers rebuilding lives after loss. I also began volunteering at a community center, teaching basic construction and home repair skills to disadvantaged youth. This work gave me purpose beyond family, allowing me to share knowledge accumulated over a lifetime, while mentoring young people who reminded me of myself at their age. The first time Jason and Amanda came to observe one of these classes, I felt a strange reversal of our previous dynamics. Now I was the one in my element, confidently leading a group respected for my expertise while they watched from the sidelines. "You're really good at this, Dad," Jason said afterward, genuine admiration in his voice. "These kids clearly look up to you." "Everyone has something valuable to teach," I replied, remembering how it felt to be dismissed as merely a servant. "The trick is finding someone willing to learn." The lesson wasn't lost on either of them. In their own ways, both Jason and Amanda began reconsidering their priorities. Amanda reduced her hours at the firm to pursue pro bono work, helping low-income families with housing issues. Jason started mentoring first-generation college students interested in law careers. These changes weren't dramatic renunciations of their previous lives, but thoughtful adjustments reflecting new awareness of what truly mattered. They still attended social functions with their professional peers, but approached these gatherings differently, less concerned with impression management, and more authentic in their interactions. The incident at the party, painful as it was, had initiated a necessary reckoning. By setting boundaries, rather than continuing to give without requirement of respect, I had actually strengthened our relationship rather than damaging it. The natural consequence of the plumbing emergency had created space for a new understanding between us. Laura had worried about the man our son was becoming, and in my grief after her death, I had lost sight of my responsibility to address those concerns. The journals she left behind gave me her voice when I needed it most, guiding me toward the difficult but necessary conversations that ultimately helped Jason reconnect with the values we had tried to instill. There's a special kind of heartbreak in being dismissed by your own child, in seeing the person you sacrificed everything for look at you with embarrassment rather than gratitude. But there's also profound joy in reconciliation, in witnessing genuine growth and the rebuilding of bonds once thought broken beyond repair. I understand now what Frank meant about recognizing teaching moments when they present themselves. Sometimes love requires standing firm rather than giving way, demanding respect rather than accepting disregard. This lesson came late in life for me, but its impact has been transformative for all of us. Looking back on that humiliating moment at the party, I can now see it as a necessary breaking point, a painful but ultimately healing fracture that allowed something healthier to grow in its place. My son called me a servant in front of everyone, but in that moment of disrespect, he inadvertently opened the door to becoming the man his mother and I had always hoped he would be. We all face moments that test our dignity, that challenge us to either accept diminishment or stand firm in our self-worth. The choice we make in those moments defines not only how others see us, but how we see ourselves. I choose dignity not out of pride, but because teaching others to respect you is an act of love toward them as much as toward yourself. How about you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? How did you balance forgiveness with self-respect? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers, and I'd love to hear how you've turned pain into wisdom in your own life. Thank you for listening, and remember, dignity isn't what others give you, it's what you claim for yourself.